Welcome everyone. We are learning Tractate Shabbos, 4th chapter. The name of the chapter is Balmet, discussing insulation. Insulation that adds heat, insulation that maintains heat, what type of material used for insulation. So we ended off yesterday. Rabbi answered a question was asked about what is considered chibur l'tuma, what is considered attached in regard to tuma, what is considered attached in regard to purification of the paraduma, and the question was if there is attachment. If the attachment is legally considered an attachment, even with regard to sprinkling, so then how much more so? If on the other hand the attachment is not legal attachment, then even with regard to tumah, they should not be considered attached. So Rava answered, by Torah law, while the scissors and plane are in use, they are considered attached both with regard to tumah and with regard to sprinkling, and while they're in use, while they're not in use, they are not considered attached neither with regard to tumah nor with regard to sprinkling. But Vergozu Rabbanon, so it starts with the top. It says Vergozu Rabbanon al tuma shelei b'shas melacha. The rabbis decreed with respect to tumah that occurred when they are not in use, mishum tuma sheb'shas melacha, because of the fear that one might incorrectly rule leniently with respect to tumah that occurred when they are in use. Likewise, they decree that we should rule stringently with respect to sprinkling that was formed when they are in use, because of the fear that one might incorrectly rule leniently with respect to sprinkling that occurred when they are not in use. So there's a distinction between when the utensil is in use and when it is not in use. So you might not be clear, it might not be clear to everyone, so the rabbis legislated that these utensils always be treated stringently. In the context of Tumah, where the stringency lies in treating them as a single utensil, they are always treated as a single utensils. In the context of sprinkling, where the stringency lies in treating them as separate utensils, they are treated as separate utensils. So that's what yesterday. Today we're going to start from Bizman Shein Lachin. Bizman Shein Lachin is about 3 or 4 lines from the top. Mishnah says, not with straw, meaning you should not insulate with straw when the straw is moist. But one may insulate with them when they are dry. Ibaleu lachin mechamas atzmon, moist on their own account with their own natural moisture, or perhaps does it mean also when they are moist because of an external factor, even if their natural moisture is gone. So when we speak about moisture, does it mean that it's an inner moisture or something that comes from the outside, and maybe it will make a difference whether I'm allowed to use it as insulation or not if the moisture comes from the outside. You should not insulate with straw, which means nor with grape skins, nor with flocking, nor with grass or grasses when they are moist. Consider that among these substances is flocking. In the right column it says, now it is well if you say that moist here means moist because of an external factor. For when they have no trouble understanding how flocking could be moist. But if you say that moist here means moist on their own, Muchin lachin v'chamas atzmo nechim ashkachas la. How is it possible for flocking to be moist on its own? What natural moisture does flocking have? So the Mishnah refers to wool pluckings that come from between the thighs of the sheep, where the wool is damp from the sweat of the animal. But consider that Baita which Rabbi Yeshaya taught, Toimnim b'chsus yevesho v'peos yeveshim, avalo b'chsus lacho v'lo peos lachim, chsus lacho mechamas atzmo heichim ashkachat la. It says one may insulate with clothing and with dry produce, but not with moist clothing or with moist produce. Clearly, this can only mean moist because of an external factor. For how is it possible for clothing to be moist on its own? The Gemara says, "Mimirto deveini atmid." It's possible whether clothing is spun from wool pluckings that come between the thighs of the sheep. So the question remained unresolved. So we'll start with the Mishnah in 49a1. Toimnim b'chsus u'bepeirus kan fiyoino v'neseres shacharoshim v'neres shapishton dako Rabbi Yehuda Isa b'dako matir b'gasa. So we may insulate with clothing, with produce, with dove's feathers, with carpenter's sawdust, with fine flax combings, and with Rabbi Yehuda prohibits insulating with fine ones, but permits insulating with coarse ones. Amar Rabbi Yanai, Tefillin tzrichin guf noki kelisho bal knafayim. Tefillin require. Why do we talk about tefillin? So the Mishnah mentioned the dove's feathers. So the dove's feathers is related to tefillin. How? Tefillin require one wears them. If you're wearing tefillin, it requires you to wear them to maintain a clean body, such as was maintained by Elisha, the winged one. What does it mean, Elisha bal knafayim? So the Gemara will explain this reference shortly, why they called him winged one. Mai Abaye Omar. What does it mean, clean body? It means that one should not pass wind while dressed in tefillin. You must feel confident that he should feel the urge to pass wind. He will be able to contain himself until he first removes his tefillin. So that's the interpretation of Rashi and Tosfos on this concept. Rava says, no, you shouldn't be sleeping with your tefillin. That's what it means, guf noki, that you alert enough that you're not going to fall asleep. Why did we call Rabbi Yanai the winged ones, someone that has wings? So, my call baknafayim shepam achas was one time the Roman government, the wicked Roman government passed an edict against Israel. That anyone who dons tefillin would have his brain gouged out. Very nice of them. Which lies beneath the spot of the head tefillin. So Elisha, we call him bal knafayim, not only put tefillin, but also went out to the market with his tefillin. Now Elisha would don them and go out into the marketplace in defiance of the edict. An officer saw him, Elisha fled from him, and the officer pursued him. I guess Elisha was not a runner, and this Roman caught up to him. So Elisha right away took the tefillin off the head and held them in his hand. Omar lei ma ze v'yotcho. The Roman said to him, what do you have in your hand? Omar lei kanfei yoino. So Elisha answered the Roman officer, I have dove's wings in my hand. Poshat es yodo v'nimtzu kanfei. He opened his hand, and they were found to be dove's wings. Lefikach kerinoisa Elisha baknafayim, and this is how he got the name Elisha the winged ones. Elisha the winged one. Umayish no kanfei sharifis. And why wings of dove rather than the wings of some other birds? Why did Elisha say wings of doves? Mishum de'im sil knesses Yisrael, because the congregation of Israel is compared to a dove. Shenema kan peyoyin nechla v'kesef, the wings of a dove covered with silver. Pasuk it says, kan peyoyin nechla v'kesef. This is a pasuk in Psalms 68:14. Ma yoinok nofel meginis aleo, af Yisrael mitzvahs meginis aleo. What is protecting the dove from? What protecting the doves from predators? Its wings; it can fly. So similarly, the Torah is protecting us. The mitzvahs are protecting the Jewish people. The mitzvahs that we do are like the wings that are protecting us. And that's how Elisha was protected. He was doing a mitzvah, so he was protected that a miracle happened to him, and the wings turned into a dove wings. Now, we are not allowed to insulate also which is a carpenter's sawdust, or with fine flax combings. Rabbi Yehuda prohibits insulating with fine ones, but permits with coarse ones. When he distinguished between fine and coarse, was Rabbi Yehuda referring to carpenter's sawdust or flax combings? He says, Rabbi Yehuda says fine flax combings are like manure. They add heat to the food when used as insulation, and obviously prohibited. Shmamina and Eil Shapishtan Kai conclude from this that Rabbi Yehuda referred to flax combings. Shmamina indeed conclude so from this. One may insulate with animal hides on Friday, and one may move them. With wool shearings, but one may not move them. What should one do if one insulated a pot with wool shearings? But what means can he gain access to the pot without handling the shearings? He removes the lid and they fall. By lifting the lid, he causes them to slide off by themselves. This way he gets rid of the insulation. After explaining how to uncover the pot, the Mishnah proceeds to discuss the proper procedure for removing the food from the pot. Kupo mito al tzido v'neitel. Kupo mate al tzido v'neitel. He tilts the entire box containing the shearings and the pot on its side, and removes the food by pouring out the amount he requires, leaving the rest of the food in the pot for the next meal. You should not lift the pot out of the box. Lest he removes the pot and then he's unable to replace it. But the sages say he may remove it and replace it. So Yosef Rabbi Yochanan Be'achinai Rabbi Menashe Yonus ben Achinai, Rabbi Menashe ben Lozo were seated together. Rabbi Chaina was seated with them, and they raised the following question: Shlochin shel beis habal tenan. Does the Mishnah refer to exclusively to the hides of a private householder who does not plan on selling them and would therefore not be reluctant to use them as a rug? When it comes to a craftsman, since he is particular with them, lest they become dirty, soiled, he would not be willing to use them as a rug, and therefore one may not move them. Or perhaps, but the Mishnah refer even to the hides of a craftsman, deeming even these to be useful as a rug, and all the more so when it comes to the hides of a householder. Amar le Rabbi Menashe ben Lozo, Mistabo sheval habayis tenan aval shluman kapid alayu. It seems logical that the Mishnah refers only to the hides of a householder, but as for those of a craftsman, he is indeed particular with them, and they should be deemed muktzah. Amalu Rabbi Chanina Barchama, Kach Omar Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, so said Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi. Going to page 49b1. Abba Shalcha Avo, father was a professional tanner, one who deals with the hides of the animals. Yet he would say, bring out hides that we may sit on them. So we see that even a craftsman is not particular about using his hides. Wooden boards of a householder may be moved, but those of a craftsman may not be moved. But if he intended to use the boards as a serving utensils to serve the guest on them, whether this or that, whether the boards belong to a householder or a craftsman, they may be moved. We see that a craftsman wares are muktzah. The Gemara says, Shani Nesom the Kapi Dalai, boards are different because the craftsman is particular with them, lest they become warped. Right?
Okay.
The Gemara attempts to resolve the foregoing Amoraic dispute concerning hides of craftsmen. Tashma, oiros, leathers, hides. Bein avudim uvein shein avudim mutal tatalon b'shamos. Whether tanned or untanned, I guess they were already done, the work was done with them or not, may be moved on the Shabbos. The Gemara says, Lo yamru avudim el inyan tum bilvad. The sages did not mention tanned as a factor except in regard to the matter of Tuma alone. The tanned hides are susceptible to Tuma, while untanned hides are not. My love loshna shabalabais loshna shuluman. Now, is it not implied by the Baisa's ruling that hides are never considered muktzah, no matter whether those of a householder or those of a craftsman? The Gemara responds, Lo shabalabais. The Baisa refers only to those of a householder. Amal shuluman mai, but when it comes to a craftsman, en metaltalim, they may not be moved. Iachi odetoni v'lo yamru avudim ela ninyatum bilvad. If so, then regarding that which the Baisa teaches, they did not mention tanned as a factor, except in regard to the matter of Tuma alone. Lifnog v'lisne b'dido. Let the Baisa distinguish and teach the same distinction between tanned and untanned hides in regard to the matter of muktzah itself, rather than present the law of Tuma as the sole case regarding with which the sages draw a distinction between tanned and untanned hides. Let the Baisa say that such a distinction exists even in regard to muktzah. The second clause of the Baisa should read as follows: Bamed v'omam murim shabala bais. We're dealing with hides that belong to a householder. So, when this ruling stated that there is no difference between moving tanned or untanned hides, So only when it comes to a householder. Hides belong to a householder. Aval b'shuluman loy. But with regard to uman, to a craftsman, this statement is not true. Rather, only untanned hides of craftsmen may be moved, because then he doesn't care. When it comes to the tanned ones, he would care, so you're not allowed to move it. However, may not be moved. The tanned hides may not be moved, because once the craftsman has tanned them, is particular with them. But the Gemara says, how? So we have a question. How come did you say that you're allowed to move them? The Gemara says, no. Kulo b'vala bais kamveli. The entire baisa deals solely with a household. It doesn't deal with craftsmen. The only distinction the baisa could draw was in regard to tuma, because it is only in regard to tuma that there exists a difference between a householder tanned and untanned hides. Because then it becomes a kli. If it's tanned, it's a kli. If it's not tanned, it's not a kli. In regard to a craftsman, however, the Baisa would in fact agree that this distinction exists even in reference to muktzah. Ketanoi, in fact, the question of whether or not the hides of a craftsman are considered muktzah is a matter of dispute between Tanoim. It was taught in a Baisa, Oil shel balabais metaltel in oison, the hides of a householder may be moved. V'shuluman ein metaltel in oison, and those of a craftsman may not be moved. Rabbi Yossi Omer echad zeh ve'echad zeh metaltel in oison, both these and those may be moved. The focus of a discussion between the above mentioned Amiroim, Rabbi Yonason ben Achinai, and Rabbi Yonason ben Eliezer ben Elozo, and Rabbi Chanina ben Barchamo shifts to a different topic. So, Hodu Yosef Kamibalu, again they sat and pondered the following. Hadesnan, regarding that which we learned in a Mishnah. Avis melochas arbaim chaser achas. The primary melochas are 40 minus 1. Keneged me. To what do they correspond? They correspond to the labors of the tabernacle, the 39 melachas, the 39 activities necessary for the construction of the tabernacle. They correspond to the mentions of work, his work, and work of appearing in the Torah, which number 40 minus 1. It says about Yosef that he came home to do his work. So, is his work included in the count of 39 or not? Let us bring a Torah scroll and count, and we find the answer. They did not move from there until they brought a Torah scroll and counted them. Let us do the same. Why am I in doubt? Because it is also written, and the work was enough, regarding the construction of the Mishkan. That is, counting both verses. And he entered the house to do his work, and the work was enough, regarding the Mishkan. There are in fact 40 mentions of the word work. So they went and counted every time it says the word work in the Torah. The question, Miminyanu, if the word work in the verse and the work was enough, understood to mean actual work? If so, it is included in the count. And the word work in the verse, and he entered the house to do his work, would then be included in the count, because this verse would expound it in accordance with the view of the one who says that it was to perform his needs, to cohabit with the wife of Potiphar, that Yosef entered the house, not to do work. Accordingly, the word work in this verse does not refer to actual work, but rather a euphemism for cohabitation. Or Dilma, or perhaps the work in the verse, and he entered the house to do his work, actual work, is included in the count, because it refers to Yosef actual work, his household chores. And this pasuk, and the work was enough in regard to the Mishkan, is not included in the count, for it means as follows: the Lashem, the Shlim Le'avidata, that the task of bringing donations to the tabernacle was completed. The Gemara concludes again with Teiku, let the question stand unresolved. The Gemara cites support for one of the views cited above as to the source for the number 39 labors. Tanya Command Omar Keneged Avedus Mishkan Abaisa was taught in accordance with the one who says that the number 39 corresponds to the 39 labors of the tabernacle. Tanya En Chayovim Ela Melocha Shekaretzu Boisa Mishkan. One is not liable except for labor, the likes of which was performed in the tabernacle. For example, Em Zoru V'atem Lo Yitizru. They planted, and likewise you shall not plant. Heim Kotzu V'atem Lo Yitikzu. They reaped, and likewise you shall not reap. Heim Elu Esakol Koshi Mekako La'agolo. They lifted the tabernacle boards from the ground of the public domain onto the wagons, which was a private domain. Likewise, you shall not bring articles from the public to the private domain. They lowered the boards from the wagon to the ground, and likewise you shall not take articles out from the private domain to the public domain. They transfer the boards from wagon to wagon, and you shouldn't do it. From one private domain to another private domain. What does one do wrong by transferring in this manner? What's the problem transferring from private to private? So Abaye v'Rava d'Omer Taravayu v'Item Ravada b'Rava m'Rishus Ha'Yochel l'Rishus Ha'Yochel derech Rishus Harabim. From one private domain to another private domain by way of a public domain, it's a problem. V'Giz Etzemer v'Metaltalin. One may insulate with wool shearings, but one may not move them. Amar Rava L'Ishonu L'Sher Toman Bohem Aval Toman Bohem Metaltalin. They did not teach the ruling that wool shearings may not be moved except where one did not insulate with them, then you shouldn't move them. Aval Toman Bohem, but where he insulated with them, they may be moved. 49b3. Rava's ruling is question is a certain student of one day's standing, one who had come to the study hall that day for the first time, challenged the ruling of Rav. So it says not necessarily they challenged Rava directly, but he asked a question. We learned that one may insulate with wool shearings, but he may not move them. So what should he do to gain access to the pot if you're not allowed to touch the insulation that covers the pot? Notice that he removes the lid and they fall. They slide off by themselves. So we see that even after being used for insulation, the shearings may not be moved except indirectly. How did you say that you're allowed to move them if they were used for insulation? What did we say before? That the way to access the pot, to gain access to the pot, is through taking off the cover and then the insulation falls. That means that you are not allowed to move the insulation. Otherwise, you could just move the pot any way you want. So how come did he say, we just learned that you're allowed to move the insulation if it was used as a covering for the pot? So we'll answer this answer tomorrow, God willing, and we'll have another video on Tractate Sota coming up.